Mark and Sarah's Stamping Retreat. Today I'm going to be showing you 5 ways of creating cards featuring this window embossing folder. Because I think a lot of people are quite used to using pattern embossing folders, but sometimes find the ones that are kind of like more like pictures as opposed to patterns more intimidating. So we're going to be using this for 5 different cards. And this is from the Stamps by Me box kit magazine that's just come out. So I'll link to that below. I'll just show you what else is in the magazine because we'll be using some of it today. I'm going to be creating some Christmas themed cards today, but actually the pack is really geared up so it could go kind of throughout the year. So you get the embossing folder in the kit, and then you get these dies as well, and it's a really nice die set. You've got love, great, enjoy and congrats, and they've got the inside piece and the piece to go round them so that you can layer them up. And then we've got this lovely big stamp set, so you can see you've got flowers, a tree, you've got this lady that I'm going to use her as kind of like someone that's going out for the evening later, in a more Christmassy way, but obviously you could use that as like a special birthday, kind of a graduation gown, a wedding gown. There's a lot of ways that you could use that. And then there's a real mixture of sentiments in there as well. So we've got happy birthday to you, I hope your day is full of fun and celebration, Christmas happiness is homemade, this is your year to sparkle. And then loads of kind of accessory stamps as well. You could see like she could be holding these balloons to make a birthday card. You've got presents, you've got kind of patterns, so it's a really big lovely stamp set. And then we've also got this gorgeous paper pack as well. I'm just going to really quickly flick through that so that you can see all the pages. You can see loads of tags, this really nice kind of floral text vibe which I really like. You can see that again, these are, some of them are a bit Christmassy, some of them are more kind of year round. So you could make a lot of different types of cards with this kit. So let's get on to making our cards then. So the first card that we're going to create today is going to be a shaker card. So you can see that I've used my included embossing folder to emboss this piece of white cardstock, and then I'm going to grab my scissors. Now you can see mine are proper craft scissors that are pointy right to the end, so that makes this kind of thing much easier with scissors. If you don't have craft scissors, then you could use your craft knife or something just to cut this out nicely. So I'm going to cut it right around the outside, but then I'm also going to cut all the panes of glass out of the middle as well, because I want it to look like a window for the shaker element. So you can see I'm just driving one of the points of my scissors into the planes of glass, and then I can cut the middle, and that'll give me the space to cut nicely around the outside. And you kind of almost have to cut a bit to give the scissors some room to manoeuvre. So you can see I have not cut right the way along there, I cut from about halfway down nicely, and then because this comes up now, then that kind of gives you the space to manoeuvre your scissors around. Obviously you don't have that problem with a craft knife, but I find scissors easier to use personally. I know different people prefer different tools. I think it's what you're used to, isn't it? And now I can just clean up this edge as well. So there's that first pane nicely cut out, so I can carry on and do all the others. So then I've got this piece of navy cardstock, and I'm just going to draw around my window because I want the navy bit to be the back of the shaker. So you can see I don't need all this detail on the side because it's just going to be the backing of the shaker, so it doesn't matter that these bits are kind of overhanging. And then I'm going to cut it out, but I'm going to cut it a little bit inside the lines. I know those lines are going to be very difficult to see on camera, but I'm going to cut it just inside the lines. So I'm just measuring it up against here. You can see there's a couple of places like just here where the blue is coming out over the white. So I just need to go through and trim those pieces down because we don't want to be able to see any blue behind the white. So I'm just going to trim it down a little bit more. I'm actually just going to trim these bits off because I don't want them to show, and we don't really need them to glue onto. And you can see that fits nicely in there. You can see a little bit of white around the outside. So then I'm going to use this one as a template to cut out some acetate as well. This is Hunkydory acetate, but any acetate is fine, even packaging. You know, some food packaging, as long as it's clean, kind of comes with a bit of acetate in the front, doesn't it? It's nice to use those bits up. So I'm going to add some double-sided tape. You want a nice strong one. I'm using tearing tape from Stampin' Up. Red liner tape is another good option. And I'm just taping around the edges because it's easier to use tape than glue for acetate. And then I'm going to add some glue to the window panes because my tape's too wide for the window panes, and that'll just help because the tape around the edges will hold it in place. It won't kind of slip and slide everywhere. It'll help keep the window panes down. So I'm going to grab my bit of glue. I'm just going to put a very fine line down here. So we've got our window now, and then I've got these foam adhesive strips. So these ones are from Stampin' Up, and they're just nice thin strips of foam. They're quite deep so that it can be used for shaker cards. So I'm just putting those around. I'm making sure that there's no gaps. So that's why I'm twisting it around the edges instead of cutting it at the edges. I'm also just making sure those corners are well pressed down because sometimes when you go around a corner it lifts up a little bit. And then I'm also just going to make sure that I line this top bit up really nicely so that there's no gaps between this piece of foam and the piece in the corner. We don't want any leakage. So then I want this to look a bit like the night sky outside. So I'm just going to use the Christmas tree stamp just to stamp a little bit so it looks like the tops of the trees through the window. Then I'm also going to take this snowflake stamp, and I just want to heat emboss that with white ink. So I'm going to stamp it a few times. So then I'm going to grab my white embossing powder. It's the Altenew Pure White. And I'm just going to pour that over my piece. You can see just down here I pressed quite lightly at the bottom because I didn't want it to cover over all of the Christmas tree bits. So I'm just going to wipe off the partial ones. And I could get all these little flecks of embossing powder off, but actually I think it will probably add to the kind of snowy look. So let's heat that up. So that'll create a nice little background for our shaker. I'm just going to powder this a little bit to try and stop the glitter from sticking just to the front of the acetate. And then I'm going to pour some glitter in. This is like really old glitter, but it's just an iridescent white glitter that you can kind of get much anywhere really. So I'm just pouring some of that into there. I'm going to take off the edges. You want to be careful not to spill any of the glitter onto the edges. And then I'm just going to carefully put this over so that it seals it but you can't see any behind. So when you flip that over you can see it's a nice kind of snowy shaker. So that's going to be the window for our card. And then I want to use this lady stamp, so I'm going to stamp her. And actually I want the tree as well. So what I'm going to do with the tree, I'll do that first actually. I'm going to use my pine needles Distress Oxide ink, and I'm going to grab a blending brush, and I'm just going to blend just over the bottom of this card. I need an area big enough for the tree to get stamped onto. So then I'm just going to stamp this tree in Evening Evergreen, really dark green ink, the Evening Evergreens from Stampin' Up, onto here. Because I want to cut it out, so I wanted to give the impression of it being really green, which is why I've stamped it onto the green as well. And then I'm going to have it coming off the card a bit. So I'm just going to cut around this bit quite loosely, because a lot of that will get cut off, and I can do the bit I need to do detailed when I know what's going to get cut off. And I'm just going to cut down this just around the tree so that it's got a bit of shape. So I've actually realised that the lady's looking the opposite way to what I thought she was looking. So I'm just going to cut up the other side detail too, because it'll actually be a bit this side that'll get cut off. So then I'm just going to stamp my lady onto this spare piece of white cardstock. And then I'm going to use my Copic markers to colour her. So I'm using E77 first for skin, and then W7 for a few little highlights. And then I'm going to use this W7 for her hair as well. And then E49 to go a bit darker on her. And then I'm going to use RV34 to do her dress. Now I've got R85, I'm just going to use that to add a bit of detail to the dress. So I'm going to cut her out. For things like this, I sometimes find it a bit easier just to cut along there, so I'm actually separating the hand from the dress, and then I can just go in and just cut out this piece between her arm. Then when I glue it down, you won't really notice because it will glue back together again. Now I'm going to take my black Stampin' Right marker. I'm just going to come in from the back. So I want this to look really sleek. I don't want to be able to see any white edges where I've cut the paper. So I'm just going round those edges and just making sure they're black rather than white, which will just help get a really nice finish to the lady. Then I'm going to cut this Winter Wishes from in the inside of this tag. So then I can build up my card. So I've got a Night of Navy 5x5 card blank. I'm going to cover it with this piece of paper from the pack that I've cut to fit. Then I'm just going to glue this onto my card. So then I want to add the lady along here, so she looks like she's looking out the window. And then I'll add the tree along the other side. But I want to add the tree so it doesn't overlap the window quite so much. So I'm going to pop some foam pads in here just to support it. So I think I'll need 2 layers of foam pads because the shaker element is quite deep. So that can sit on there. And then I'm going to trim the excess off the back. And then my Winter Wishes can sit down here. Now I'm just going to use a couple of these Sweet Lilac Nouveau drops just to add a few baubles to the tree. And there we go, so that's our first card finished with a nice shaker element. So then for my next card, I've got elements from the kit. So I've actually used my window frame just to emboss a piece of this same paper, you can see. So I've cut a bit of the plane and just embossed that for the window frame. And I'm just going to add on a little bit of brushing bride ink just to give it a bit of extra kind of texture and to tie it in with the flowers on the outside. So I'm just going to brush that just a little bit around the outside just to add a little bit of colour here and there. And then I've got a bit of vellum that I'm just going to add behind it. So I'm just going to take my pencil and I'm just going to trace around it onto here. And then just like I did on the other one, I'm going to cut inside the lines. So then I'm going to cut quite significantly in the lines here because I don't need any of the additional bits. I don't need to make sure like anything's staying in like I did on the last one because I had the shaker element on the last one. I just need to make sure there's enough to be able to glue it onto the back of the frame. So that's going to work just fine. So I'm going to add some wet glue on the back. So then I've got a 5x7 card blank and I've cut this from the paper pack to fit on the front. And I'm going to add some foam pads onto the back of this. I'm just going to cut them up a little bit so they're not too wide. And obviously I don't want them to show through the vellum, so I'm just being careful just to keep them on the sides where you won't be able to see them through the vellum. And then I've also got this robin that I've cut from the paper pack. So I'm going to pop him on dimensionals. I'm going to put one set of dimensionals where it's going to go over the window, which has already got a set of dimensionals behind it, and two where it's going to go straight onto the card front. And then I've got this Happy Holidays die cut that I've cut using the classic Happy Holidays cutting dies from Spellbinders, but obviously any Christmas sentiment that you've got. I've used garden green cardstock from Stampin' Up. I wish that I had remembered to pop some adhesive sheet behind this before I cut it. So that's that card completed. So for this next card, I'm going to create an easel card. So I've got a top folding 5.5 by 4.25 inch card, and I'm going to score it across the front panel at 2 3/4 inches. So that's halfway across the front panel. And then I'm just going to fold that to create an easel. So then I've got a 5.5 by 4.25 inch piece of cardstock as well. I'm just going to glue on this piece of 5.5 by 4.25 inch paper that I've got from the pack. And so then this is going to be our card front. And then I've also got this piece of pink paper that I've cut from the pack, and it's 4.25 inches wide so that I can stick it across the front bit in the inside of my card. So that will stand up like there. So then I've got this window piece and I want to create a mirror out of it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut out the inside panels. So I'm just going to leave this archway bit here. So I'm going to cut through these two side bits. So then I've got this piece of Mirri card from Hunkydory, just silver Mirri, and I'm going to use that as the mirror bit from inside. So I'm just going to do the same as I've done on a couple of the others, and I'm just going to trace this around and cut a piece out to back the frame. So then I'm just going to glue that onto the back of my frame. So then we've got our mirror. I want to stamp the lady so that she can be looking in the mirror. So I'm going to do her a nice teal dress. So I'm using BG05 and then BG49. Actually, I think I like this dark teal better, so I'm going to actually go over the whole thing with it. So I'm going to use E43 for skin. I want to give her a kind of auburn here, so I'm going to try putting on some of this brown colour, which is E57. Then I'm going to go over with R05 to add a kind of reddy tint to it. Now I can cut her out. Now I'm going to cut this Merry Christmas out of here. So I'm going to pop the Merry up in this corner here. Let's just trim that excess off the top. And then I'm going to glue the mirror onto the bottom. And then I want to pop the lady on there. I'm going to have this bottom of her dress hanging over the edge. You'll see why in a second. And then I'm just going to chop off the bottom of her dress. I'm going to save it because I'm going to use it in a second. Then that's ready to glue onto there. So I'm lining it up with the bottom of that card piece. So then I've cut a piece of Stampin' Up! Bermuda Bay cardstock that's 1 inch by 4¼ inches, and I'm just going to glue that Christmas that we cut out onto there. And then I'm going to pop these up on some dimensionals. That's going to act as our stopper. And then I'm going to just add this down here, just to kind of finish off her dress. So then there's my finished easel card. It looks like the dress is kind of coming down and coming out here. And you've got a nice space inside to write your message. And then for my next card, I've got this window frame that I've embossed in very vanilla cardstock from Stampin' Up! And I'm just brushing on some of this copper shine gilding polish, but your metallic paints and things like that would work too. I'm not worried about going into the window panes because I'm going to cut those out. So then I'm going to cut that out. So now I've got my metallic window and I want this to go behind it so it looks like the deer's looking through the window. So because I want it in a very specific place, I'm actually going to glue it on first and then cut round it. So then I'm going to make a circular card. So I've got these two circles that are roughly 6 inches. So one is made out of £110 Nina Solar White cardstock, and the other one I've covered with paper from the pack, but it's the same cardstock, and then cut it out. So then I'm just going to put that in at 1/2 inch and score that, and I can fold that over, and then I'm going to line that up and cut off 1 inch parallel to that score line at the other side, and that will help the card stand up. So then I'm just going to glue these bits together. So then I've got 2 more circles. They're both cardstock that I've covered with paper from the pack, and then the green one measures just over 5¼ inches, and this one with the text on measures just over 5 inches. And I'm going to glue those together. And I'm going to pop this layer up onto some dimensionals. And then I'm going to pop this on. Then I'm going to cut this season's greeting text from here. I've not decided exactly where I'm going to put this yet, so I'm going to just lay out everything and see where I want it. So I've used these Holiday Blooms cutting dies to cut these pieces. I've glued most of them together, I've just still got the poinsettias to do. And they're all really simple to put together. You can see this comes like that, and I've just put all the cream bits on top. These you just cut out, these bits, that's all one die with the 5 pieces, and then you just glue that behind the stems. So they're very simple to put together. So with these flowers I'm just going to bend the petals a little. You need to be a little bit careful with them because the petals are made up of little pieces. It's easy enough to bend them round just to give them a bit more dimension. And then I can just pop a bit of glue on the back of there, offset it on here. I do apologise if you can hear the rain outside because it is pouring down. And then I'm just going to put a gold gem just in the middle just to set it off. So then I'm just going to lay this out just to see how I want it, and also to see where I want my greeting. So I think I might actually just put this up here. I might cut around it a little bit more. And then I think I'm happy with that layout, so I'm going to start sticking it down. I think I'm going to take a bit of the stems off these because they're a bit too long for what I want them for. And I'm just going to cut a bit off the end of here as well. So I decided I didn't like that other sentiment, so I've taken that off and I'm going to put this there instead. Then there's our finished card. So then for my final card, I've got a white window that I've embossed onto some white cardstock. I'm just going to cut it out the same way I have done for a lot of the others. I'm going to cut around the outside and I'm going to cut the window panes out of the middle. So I'm going to place this on here, and I'm just going to draw kind of around the inside of the windows just to create shape. So I need to cut that from the card below. So I can use that. I need to cut very slightly outside this line. So then I want some acetate to go behind there. So I'm going to put some tape on the back of the frame. And then I'm going to put some glue just behind these bits. And then I'm going to pop that onto here. And then I'm going to cut around here. I'm going to take my score tool and I'm going to score just down here along the edge of that window frame. And then with my paper trimmer, I'm just going to cut it in half down the middle. So now I've got two halves. I'm going to create kind of like patio doors. Before I do that, I want to do some kind of ink blending. So I'm going to put that inside so that it doesn't go inside, and then that's underneath to catch anything outside. And I'm just going to take my vintage photo distress ink and I'm just going to rub it on. Now I'm going to take my white jelly roll pen and I'm just going to draw on some bricks. Then inside the card, I want to create a little bit of a scene that you're going to see through this front bit. So I'm just going to draw really faintly through this so that I know how much room I've got to play with. And then I'm going to use my Evening Evergreen ink to stamp the Christmas tree. And then I've got this milled lavender distress ink. I'm just going to rub out this line that I drew. And then I'm just going to use the milled lavender just to add a slight bit of colour on here. It's a very pale ink, so it just kind of is going to add just a little bit of colour around. And then I'm just going to use the present stamps just to stamp onto some spare white cardstock. And then I'm going to colour those with my Copics. So now I can glue these on. So then I've got another window here that I have embossed, and I'm just going to cut that. But I don't want this bottom piece here, so I'm just going to cut up the inside of here, because I just want to kind of create it as a like frame around what will be our doors. And then I can just cut around the edge. So then I can glue that on. I just want to make sure that the bottom is lined up with the edge of the card. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to add these doors over the top, but I'm only going to attach them down here. So I'm going to use my tape because there's a lot of acetate on that. And make sure it's going to stick nicely. And you can see that my tape's just slightly too wide, so I'm just going to bend the edges over because I don't want any extra sticking where it shouldn't. So then we've got this really cute kind of Christmas scene that opens up. What I should have done before I did this really is stamp the sentiment. What I'm going to have to do with stamping it now. So I'll practice it a couple of times on a piece of scrap just to make sure it's stamping nicely. Then I've got my Christmas Happinesses Homemade at the top. And then I'm just going to finish with some of those little sweet lilac Nouveau drops to decorate the tree. Okay, so then that's that card completed. Let's bring in all the other cards. You can see that we've got a real range of cards using this window. I'd love to know which is your favourite. Let me know in the comments below. So I really hope that you enjoyed today's video. If you did, I'd appreciate you clicking like below, and you can also press subscribe if you'd like to see future videos. If you press the bell button and select all, then YouTube will also notify you when I've got a new video available. All of the products that I've used for today's cards are listed in the description below, and you can also find a link there to my blog where you can find a picture supply list if that makes it easier to find what you're looking for. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope to see you again soon.